Today we are going to review a little bit on storyline, and in 6th grade you should have covered most of it. I know especially Fisher's class, they go over it quite a bit, and I believe that the other two classes do as well. So for a lot of you this is just going to be practice or reviewing a little bit, but for some of you it may be new, so feel free to replay this video as often as you like. The first part, what we've got here I guess, is an outline of a story element, and if you were to take a book, you see this, and hold it this way, essentially what we're doing is this part of the storyline right here means like the front cover of the book, and this part of the storyline means the back cover of the book. And so if the book were this thick right here, you would kind of be able to divide this up and say roughly the first tenth of it is going to be covering this part of the story, and then about 3/4 of the way through you're going to hit this part of the story, and then the ending of it kind of wraps up right here. So this is, if you were looking at a cross-section of the book, that's kind of what this storyline does right here. So we're going to take a peek at what those elements are. The first element in the story is the exposition. Okay, that's this one right here. That's the exposition. And the exposition roughly exposes the characters and the setting. Okay, it's going to expose who's in the story and where it's going to take place. So it exposes characters and the setting. Okay. The next piece in a storyline is the story is going to introduce you to the conflict of it. Now that you know the characters and kind of where roughly it takes place, and probably even the time frame too, it's going to give you some sort of a conflict. And the conflict, I'm going to drop this over here. Okay, the conflict can be a number of things. It can be a person versus a person, which we would call man versus man. It can be man versus nature, or it can be man versus self. Okay, so this is two people having a conflict with each other. This is maybe somebody gets lost in a wilderness or stuck at sea and fights nature to get back to where he needs to be or she needs to be. And man versus self is somebody who's maybe having an internal conflict with something, a struggle that they're having, a temptation that they're having a tough time dealing with. The next part, then, once they introduce the conflict, is a story will build on these bits called the rising action, and they're all these little teeny tension building things where things kind of get complicated and wrapped up into themselves, and you start to kind of worry that, you know, maybe there's not going to be any solution for this conflict that came about in the beginning. So this is called the rising action. R-I-S-I-N-G. And again, this is where tension builds. Okay, things get complicated. It appears to be the middle, just because it's kind of the middle of the action or the height of the action, but usually it's going to be, you know, 3/4 of the way through the book, you're going to come across what you call the climax. Okay, and that it's the height of the action. It is where the story's direction changes. It takes a new route. Something happens, something breaks, and the story, you start to see a little bit of clarity in it. Okay? Once the climax happens, then the book starts, or the book or the movie starts to wrap itself up, and the section of the movie or book is called the falling action. Whoops, wrong color. Okay, And this is where the complications start to get cleared up. The complications clear back over here from the rising action. All of these knots and twists and turns that happened here that led to the climax in the falling action, all of these things sort of sort themselves out. So complications get cleared up. Okay? The very last thing is where it gets resolved. This is called the resolution. This is where the conflict that was introduced over here gets resolved. R-E-S-O-L-V-E-D. Okay. And all of that tension that was created, this tension that was built up here, it subsides. It gets resolved. Okay. So I'm going to put that as well. Tension is actually, I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say tension subsides. Okay. So this is generally your storyline with all of the different pieces to it and a little bit of an explanation. You probably also remember about story elements. There are 3 elements of a story. One of them is going to be the setting. Of course, these all happen over here. These get exposed in the exposition. But you've got your setting, and that's generally where something takes place and when, what time period. Okay, is it futuristic on a planet hasn't been discovered yet, or is it in the 1920s in the Dust Bowl during the Depression? Okay, so this is kind of your setting. The next part is going to be the plot. And of course, that is the what happens, the why it happens, the how it happens, and the part that I just call the it's all the undescribed, all the bits about it that give the story richness and clarity. And then, of course, you have your characters. Which is your who. So if you kind of think about the 5 W's that you always learn about when you're writing any kind of a paper, they're always covered in here, the story elements. You have your who, your what, where, when, why, and how. They're all covered in the story elements, just like any paper. You can think of a story or a movie as just like a really long expository paper that covers all of these elements. The last thing that I want to kind of show you is that this is 90%. I just made that statistic up. Actually, I don't know what it is, but it's a huge amount of all storylines. This form right here is what roughly 90% of all storylines look like. Most authors use this storyline when they're telling a story. Some other possible storylines are kind of like this, where the climax happens earlier in the book or in the story. Somewhere they kind of come up and then the climax happens and they drop straight off. They just resolve it in like a sentence, and there's not a lot of tie-up. There's also ones that leave you up to the climax and then leave you hanging. And there's also some that actually start you right at the big rush, right at the climax, and the whole story is giving you the history, and then it resolves itself in the end. None of these we will be using. These are storylines that really skilled and longtime authors will be using. Someday when you get published yourself, you can probably play around with those. But for now, we are just going to look at this basic one right here. That's pretty much it for storyline. And now that we've reviewed storylines, you're going to go to the wiki and print out one of your very own and fill it out based on a movie or a book that you have recently either seen or read. For tomorrow, or for the next time we meet, have your storyline completed and ready to discuss in class. We're going to have a class discussion on this exact thing right here, based on a book that you've recently read or a movie that you've recently seen. And just to give a quick example, what I'd like you to do is you're going to write like exposition. See if I can spell. Exposition, and then you're going to just list a few of the characters. Who are the main characters? Tell me a little bit about the setting, about the where and the when did it happen. Okay, so you're just going to go through, write the title of each main point on there, and then list some specific things about your book or about your movie. Okay, if this was about the Three Little Pigs, I would say 3 pigs. Okay, the setting is on maybe in a country town. Okay, I think that should do it. All right, good luck, have fun, we'll see you tomorrow.